So we have the last talk for today by Andrew, and you reschedule.
Yeah, I wish I could say that my talk's going to be easier than Winsu, but I'm just going to try to make it as intuitive as possible. I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity given to me to present this talk and to accommodate the unforeseen circumstances a couple of days ago. So my name is Andrew, and I'm from Center for Conflict Analysis in Singapore, and this work is done in collaboration with Calvin and Dr. and Miller in Singapore, which names listed up there. So I'm just going to get right into it. So first, I'm just going to talk about time series data, which basically when you collect data over some period of time. And there are many examples of this. It can be the financial market, when you keep track of how much your stock price goes up and down each day, or you can just it can be just like by flipping a fair coin and coding the outcome. And obviously, one is more complicated than the other. Your stock price might depend on your stock price in the last 1 year or so, and it might have something more. Some might be more probable than others, whereas the fair coin are just IIP. So the probability of this time series data can be modeled by or described mathematically by stochastic process, which is basically just this by infinite strings labeled by the integers, and we just let all the those with periods -1, -2, and so on as the past, and 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on as the future. And they're going to be noted as those x with arrow pointing left and x with arrow pointing right. And here we are going to consider those stochastic processes that are stationary, and that basically means that they satisfy the stationarity condition, which basically means that if I take L subsequent random variables starting from time t, and another L subsequent random variables starting from a different time t prime, their probability are going to be equal. And what we're looking, what the question that we're trying to answer here in this work is that how to model this stochastic process with the least amount of memory possible, because you obviously can store all your past and then you determine what's the probability and simulate this stochastic process. But we want the least memory possible. Right. So to answer that, I'm just going to look at this toy example, which is not as simple as the fair coin flips, but not as complicated as the financial market, and that's the third coin process. And this is basically when I have two different coins. Say I have this €1 coin and this 100 Indonesian rupiah coin, and I'm going to, after I see an outcome of head, then I'm going to use the Indonesian rupiah coin, but after I see a tail, I'm going to use the €1 coin. And we are going to assume that both of these coins are not fair coins. And this stochastic process can be modeled by what's known as hidden market model, or HMM for short. And here I'm going to assume the probability of head for the euro coin is P, and the probability of tail of the Indonesian rupiah coin is P. So it's kind of like the opposite. And basically, this HMM can be described by this directed graph, and the nodes are what's called the internal state of the model, and this sigma 0 is basically when I use this Indonesian rupiah coin, and sigma 1 is when I use the euro coin. And let's just look at one part of this. So this arrow pointing from sigma 0 to sigma 1 means that when I'm in state sigma 0, the probability of me seeing a tail and transitioning to state sigma 1 is P. So 1 here just means tail. And more formally, we can describe it as this tuple, so we have this set of states as its first entry, and the second one is just the transition matrix that describes the edges of this directed graph. So, for example, like this bottom left entry means that when I'm in initial state sigma 1, the probability of seeing a head and transitioning to sigma 0 is B. And this HMM also have this stationary distribution, and that's basically the probability distribution of which state your model is currently in when you don't know anything about the past. And that's that value there, and it can be obtained by taking the left eigenvector with eigenvalue 1 of this matrix T, which basically just the sum of these transition matrices. And lastly, we also want this correctness condition for our HMM, which basically says that it's going to output this the symbols with the probability the same as the stochastic process that it models. And lastly, we define the memory of the model as this entropy or Shannon entropy of this of its stationary state. And we want our goal here is to minimize this value. Okay, so let's wait to I guess 6. So we want to find so far this everything is still classical. So we want to find a classical model that minimizes this entropy of the stationary state. For classical models, it's convenient to consider this two types of hidden Markov models. The first one is the predictive hidden Markov model, and that basically means, given that we know the entire past, you're going to know with certainty which state your model is going to be in. And for among all predictive model, there's a known optimal construction given any arbitrary stochastic process, and that's called the epsilon machine. And that's from this work by Shaliz in Crutchfield in 2001. And what this epsilon machine does is basically it maps all paths that has the same feature statistic to the same state. And it also uses this encoding function for each time step. So with initial state S and outcome X, then I have this unique state that the machine is going to be in after that time step. And this machine, for the particular that we've seen earlier, is basically the epsilon machine for the predictive point process. And just to find some notation here, so see here, so the least amount of memory that you can achieve given all classical predictive model. And the second machine here is the general model, and that's a more general model where you don't necessarily you may not be able to know with certainty which state your model is going to be at, even though you know the entire past. So yeah. And CG here is basically the best that you can do, considering all generated model. And it was shown that for predictive point, CG can be strictly less than CG. And this is basically the construction of that. Although there's no known general construction for any arbitrary stochastic process, and that has been a long-standing problem in this field. Right. So the question I want to ask now is, can we even that generative model? And the answer is yes, but we have to resort to non-classical models, and those are quantum models, and even we'll talk a bit later about even beyond classical, beyond quantum models. Yeah, this visual, just want to talk about the rest of this presentation. So I'm going to talk about how we can reduce the memory further using quantum mechanics. And I'm going to talk about quasi-probability representation of these quantum models and how they can be useful. And lastly, how we can reach the information theoretical minimum of the memory of the model, but we have to resort to beyond quantum model. Yeah, so basically, there's this construction of this quantum model called the Q machine, which basically takes the epsilon machine and kind of like quote unquote quantize it. And that's by having this one-to-one correspondence between the states of the epsilon machine and the states of this quantum machine, which basically are this set of pure states. And the transition now is going to be a unitary, and the unitary is defined by its action on this pure states and an ancilla, and it's going to produce this entangled state, which amplitude encodes the transition probability of the original epsilon machine that we have. And of course, we can also define a transition channel from it, or a CPP map, completely positive trace preserving. We can also define its cross representation, and we can also have this set of completely positive maps for each of the output symbols X. And we sum this CP maps up, we can recover the transition channel. Yeah, so it can be defined in similar ways, so this set of pure states, and we have the transition channel as transition that the model will go through. Yeah, it also have this stationary state rule, and it's a mixed state of this internal states with its convex coefficient being the stationary distribution of the original epsilon machine that we have. And it also satisfies this correctness condition, but now it's a trace of this composition of this CP maps according to which string we're looking at. Yeah, so this is basically the trick of how we reduce memory using this quantum model. And that's basically by encoding the states of the epsilon machine to non-orthogonal states. So instead of encoding it as 0 and 1, so this is just a slice of the block sphere, we encode it as non-orthogonal state, the sigma 0 and sigma 1, which has non-zero overlap. Now, if we take the von Neumann entropy of the stationary state of this quantum model, then this is what we get, and this is what we're doing. Yeah, and CQ is the minimum memory that we can achieve given all quantum predictive model. Right. So CQ is strictly less than CG, which is the generative model complexity, and C, which is strictly less than CMU, which is the for the predictive classical predictive model. And yeah, you can see that in this plot. So the red one is the best you can do with predictive model. Green one is the best you can do with generative model, and the quantum is even better. We have this blue line, which is below all the others. Just a quick note that we have this brown one, which is the this construction of quantum generative model, but it's not always better than the Q machine, so I'm not going to cover that in this talk. And yeah, lastly, there's also this excess entropy, which lower bounds the memory of all classical and quantum models, and that's basically this black line here. Yeah, so it basically lower bounds all of those. Yeah, so you can see here that even the quantum model cannot reach this excess entropy lower bound. So that's the next thing what we want to achieve. So want to get the memory down to the excess entropy down. Yeah, so that's basically what I said. And basically by doing how we do this is by looking into this negativity of the quasi-probability representation of the quantum model, which has been very well studied and it has been identified as a resource in quantum computation and lots of other tasks. Yeah, that's basically the next section. So yeah, just a quick intro of quasi-probability representations. Basically, this is defined by frame and drill frames, and they're sets of Hermitian operators inside the space of the mission operators that their density matrices and effects lives in. And they satisfy this condition. So basically, for all the mission operators in that space, you can write it in terms of this fragment. So this gives us this one-to-one mapping between permission operators and quasi-probabilities. And how we do that is basically, so before that, so this density operator will be mapped to this vector, quasi-probability vector, which sums up to 1, although its entries can be negative. Whereas the channels or CPP maps are going to be mapped to this quasi-row stochastic matrices. So it rows sums up to 1, but its entries can be negative. And basically how we define the entries are these. So we just take the trace of the frame element with the density matrix, and for the channel, we do this. So we use the frame and Joe frame. So there are many examples of quasi-probability representations, and they have different characters. So the most popular one would probably be the discrete Wigner representation. In continuous variable, we have Wigner representation, but this is basically kind of like the analog of the discrete analog of that. And we also have the symmetric information complete representation, and we have many more. And what was shown by Ferry and Anderson in these 2 papers is that any quasi-probability representation of quantum theory must contain negativity. So this mu cannot be a proper probability distribution, and this tau cannot be a proper row stochastic matrix. So they must contain some negativity. Yeah. Or actually, either one must contain negativity. Yeah, so to see how this, looking into this negativity can help, we consider this general quantum model. So we start by defining the code space, and this is for third point. I'm just going to keep going back to the third point for the rest of this talk. So we just want to consider these 2 arbitrary code states. So we just they're parameterized by this alpha and beta. I just want to assume they're real because we only have 2 states. And so yeah, if you take the overlap, it's going to be that. And to generate the correct probability, to simulate the stochastic process correctly, we found that this cross operator will work. I mean, by all means, this is not the only one, but this one works just fine. And if we just plug that into the channel, and it's basically going to be a stat with this coefficients z alpha and z beta. And so we want to impose this condition on the alpha and beta, and p, which depends on p, which is the parameter of the stochastic process. So we want this so that the z alpha and z beta are all positive. Yeah, so we can correct the correct statistics. So yeah, if we optimize the memory based on this constraint, then we're going to find that this overlap is optimal, and that's basically the overlap of the states of the Q machine that we've seen on a few slides back. Now, yeah, so this is the memory of this machine that's parameterized by this alpha, beta, and p. So it's independent of the case like that's just how we define based on the construction that we did. Then we asked the question: what if we just set this alpha and beta such that this code states just very, very close to one another? Because if we do that, then we can just set the memory very, very close to 0. But unfortunately, there's this upper bound that that has to be satisfied by all quantum models, and that's this fidelity bound. So it cannot be larger than the sum of the square root of the future statistics starting from state S and multiplied by this future statistic from state S prime. And for perturbed coin, this upper bound is basically that, which means that the encoding of the cube machine construction that we've seen earlier is optimal, because that's precisely that. And yeah, so if we look at the going back to the quasi-probability representation, then this is what we're going to get from the stationary states and from the code states and from the transition channel, where this blue entries can be negative. So if we see the overlap and the negativity and the memory of this model as we tweak them, then you can see from this blue line that the memory decreases as the overlap increases, whereas the negativity also increases as the overlap increases, although at some point the negativity of these two code states somehow decreases, but that happens as the negativity of this transition channel increases. And at some point, we cannot go further with quantum models because we have that this bound, and that's basically this dotted brown line here. So if we go beyond that, then it's no longer a quantum model. So yeah, so based on that, then we have some hint of how we can reduce the memory even further, and that's by resorting to non-quantum models. And that's basically what we did. We just set this overlap of theta A, and theta B to be very large. So this is the condition that we had before. So we have to violate this condition to get even larger overlap. And so now what we have is this mapping transition map, and now instead of the cross operators, we have this the left cross operator and the right cross operator are going to be different for each entry, and that's going to give us the correct statistics, because otherwise if we only use a single cross operator, then it won't give us the correct statistics. But the trade-off here is that it's going to be no longer completely positive. So yeah, that's kind of like the sacrifice that we have to make to have this lower memory than the quantum models. Yeah, just a quick note that this non-completely positive map has some interpretations where you have this initial correlation between your input state and your ancillary state that you trace later on. Yeah, so it's just side. Yeah, and from the quasi-probability representation, that we also construct this different model we call the M machine, and that's basically by taking the idea that if we sum up the first and second term in the quasi-probability representation of the channels and the third and fourth term, then we can recover the entries of the original transition matrix. So basically, try to do the opposite. So we start with this machine and we split each of the state and put some negativity in the transitions between the state that we split. So just to give you an example. So the next slide. So yeah, so that's basically what I just said. The transition between the states that we split, however, have to satisfy this condition, which basically the sum of all incoming arrows on the split state must be equal to the probability of the incoming arrow in the original diagram. So that we can maintain the correctness of the statistics that the machine outputs. Right, so going back to the third point example, so here we keep the sigma 1 state and just relabel it as sigma tilde 1 0, and we skip sigma 0 and label the unsplit state as the sigma tilde 0 1 and sigma tilde 0 0. As I mentioned before, so the incoming arrows of the split state, the sum of the probabilities must be the same as that, so that we can produce the correct statistics. So yeah, this here is 1 minus Q plus Q1, where Q1 is just a parameter that we can freely choose in the construction. So that sums up to 1 minus P. And the incoming arrows here to 0, 1 and to 0, 0, as those were initially a single state, so that sums up to P. So P minus Q2 plus Q2. Right, so this HMM with negative transition probability and negative states has been studied under the name of quasi-realization. And that was studied in this textbook on HMM by Vidal, and more recently in this paper by Peniza, Lagares, and Winter in 2022. But this quasi-realization it encompasses more general model than this M machine, but this M machine basically is one instance of this quasi-realizations. But the downside here is that we can no longer use the Shannon entropy, because if you plug in the stationary state of this M machine into the Shannon entropy, then you're going to have negative values inside the log function, and that's not good. You just speed up. So yeah, so basically we use this ready-to entropy as the measure of memory, and we use the way we have mutual information as this excess entropy. And these have quite nice property that resembles the original the Shannon entropy and the Shannon mutual information that we used earlier, and it still satisfies these inequalities. And it also have this lower bounds all the memories for the Pascal and the Pascal models. And it also it reproduces correct statistics as the Shannon mutual information excess entropy that we used earlier. It also satisfies these equalities. So this is basically how we can reach the excess entropy lower bound. So this is the stationary state that we've got, and we just set this parameter to these values, and that's how we can reach the lower bound. And that's basically what it looks like. It's quite similar when we use the relative entropy or the Shannon entropies. That's basically it. So we can reduce memory even further than quantum models, and it can use negativity to attribute that memory savings. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Andrew. Question. Okay, good. Then let's thank all the speakers again.